She would hear Lizzie screaming from downstairs from the sitting room. Bridget, quick, come, someone killed father. And of course Bridget was shocked and she ran downstairs. This was such a gruesome crime scene because Andrew Borden was not just killed, his face was basically completely destroyed. Someone must have taken something like a hatchet or an axe and, well, beaten him with this hatchet or axe about 19 times in the face. So there is nothing left of his face. And now Bridget has a situation that she stands there seeing the dead body of her employer and does not know really what to do. And Lizzie's also... Hello and welcome back to my channel for another true crime video. My name is Mara and welcome to my channel Mara Cuja. In case you haven't done so already, please make sure to like, share and especially subscribe for more future content like this. A lot back in time, better say in the 1800s. And to understand what may have happened to Abby and Andrew Borden a little bit better, we have to understand the family dynamics in the Borden family first. Lizzie and Emma were the two daughters. And Lizzie actually lost her mother when she was only 2 years old. Her sister Emma was 10 years older and gave her mother, while she was on her deathbed, the promise that she would take care of Lizzie. And this promise, well, she took it quite serious. And Emma would be a mother figure for little Lizzie. As the two siblings grew older, well, at least a little bit older, Andrew married again. And his new wife was originally called Abby Gray, but she would eventually take, as it was usual back then and as often usual even today, she would take Andrew's name and was from now on Abby Borden. Lizzie and Emma were not happy about the situation because for Lizzie, Emma was kind of the mother figure. And Lizzie, well, at first she seemingly got a little bit better along with Abby, but under the influence of Emma, who did not want another figure around. She did not want competition. For her, it was clear that she was the mother figure to Lizzie. She gave her mother the promise on her deathbed that she would be there for little baby Lizzie. And this promise turned out to be very serious to Emma. And that is why Emma started to, well, have an influence on Lizzie. And Lizzie started to dislike Abby Borden more and more. Andrew Borden also found out about these dynamics because it was quite obvious that Lizzie and Emma did not like Abby Borden, since they actually referred to her by Mrs. Borden. They refused to call her mother or whatever, they just called her Mrs. Borden. And they would also refuse to take family dinners with Mrs. Borden. They would try to stay in their room or stay outside. And even when meeting Abby, so their stepmother, in town, they would just ignore her. And the street was everything back then. We're talking about the 1800s. And it was so important for people to be recognized, because being recognized on the streets was a sign of influence, was a sign of respect. And Lizzie would just, and Emma as well, they would just ignore Abby and her family. And this was a huge sign of disrespect back then. So that's the situation. In the family, there is a certain tension in the air. And Andrew also realizes that there is tension between his two daughters and his new wife. And this is also the reason why Andrew would eventually decide that it was time for Emma to study outside of town. So she had to go to a boarding school, a Catholic boarding school for girls only. And that's when Lizzie got a little bit closer to Abby again. And eventually Emma would get back home. And this is when the tension in the house started to rise again. Lizzie would stop calling Mrs. Borden mother and just refer to her as Mrs. Borden and show her the same amount of disrespect as she used to before Emma was, well, out of the house for about 2 years, I think. Yeah. And we also have to go a little bit deeper in the financial background of the family, and also to understand a little bit better why there is this tension in the household. The family Borden, they lived in Fall River in Massachusetts, and the family Borden was actually quite wealthy. But the family Borden we are talking about today, so the family of Andrew Borden, was kind of on the lower income side of the family branch. So they were not poor, by far they were not poor people, but they did not have these immense and impressive financial resources as the rest of the family did. The family who lived up the hill, the family Borden lived down the hill, and the rest of the family Borden basically, so the cousins and other relatives of Lizzie and Emma, they lived up the hill. They lived on the hill, and this was the life Emma and Lizzie wanted. And it would eventually turn out that Andrew, although being not born in the rich branch of the family Borden, would become quite a successful real estate owner and also quite a successful businessman. He worked for his money, and this is also what makes him so, well, devastated or not just wasting money. He was someone who was really much taking care of his finances, and this is something Lizzie and Emma were absolutely not happy about, because they wanted the luxury life on the hill. They wanted to live up this hill. They wanted to live on the hill. They wanted to have a perfect mansion like their cousins did, because they were invited there to play card games and to, well, have some tea time with their cousins and other relatives. But they were not invited to the fancy parties. And the fancy parties were the events Emma and Lizzie would have needed to go in order to find representable and respectable potential future husbands. And Lizzie and Emma both were not married. Lizzie was 32 at this time we're talking about today, and she was still not married. And Emma, as you remember, was even 10 years older, so she was already 42. And both of them were not married. Still, they came from a respectable family. Andrew Borden became richer and richer with the time, and he would eventually become quite wealthy, and he would have been able to afford a house on the hill. And Emma and Abby knew this, but he just did not want to waste his money. And Abby and Andrew, they were fine with living down the hill, and their house was actually also quite nice. I mean, they did not have electricity for quite some time, even though electricity was already around back then, but they had running water, and the furniture in the house was also quite impressive. So it was not like they lived under really bad circumstances or anything like this. They had quite a decent home, but it was not enough because it was not up the hill. It was a good house. It was a nice house. It was a nice home, but it was on the wrong place for Lizzie and Emma. Still, Emma and Lizzie came from a respectable family. They were still part of the Borden family, and thus people in Fall River still accepted Emma and Lizzie, although they were not married. And Lizzie would also work as a Sunday school teacher, and she was very involved in the church. So Catholicism was something really important for Lizzie Borden. And also Emma was quite big in the church. So this is how they actually managed to stay in the community, to stay respected in the community, because they came from the family Borden. And Lizzie was also very involved in the church, and Emma was also involved in the church. So people respected them anyways. And also they had money. They seemingly had money. And although Andrew Borden was, well, really not the person who wanted to waste money on anything, he still, well, gave enough money to Abby and Lizzie and also on Emma to make them be able to dress in nice clothing. So they were always seen on the street dressed really nicely, having these really nice dresses. And this was also what, well, made it possible for them to stay respected in society, because people knew they had money, they came from the family Borden, and they were involved in church, although they were not married. So yeah. And Lizzie was also allowed by her father to make a trip to Europe when she was younger, and this is also very expensive, and I guess it was also very expensive, if not even more expensive, back in the 1800s. So, and Andrew also paid for Emma's college fees. So now that we know the background situation of the family Borden, we are going to look at a certain date, at the first date, which may be really important to understand what happened to Andrew and Abby. And this date is June 21st in 1891. This was when someone broke into the family house, and whoever broke in, well, this was a very interesting incident because the burglary went on during broad daylight, so it was in the middle of the day, in a quite safe neighborhood. Only things from Andrew's and Abby's bedroom would be stolen, so nothing from nothing from Lizzie and Emma's bedroom was stolen, or bedrooms. And this was quite interesting because especially Abby's stuff was stolen, and still things that would have been very valuable, like jewelry, was left behind. Only jewelry which was kind of important for Abby due to personal reasons was stolen. And Andrew first of all called the police and informed the police about the incident, about the burglary, and police wanted to investigate, but a little later Andrew came back to the police and actually told them that it was no longer necessary for them to investigate in the burglary into the family home. And why would Andrew do this? So yeah, it was unusual for Andrew Borden to go to police and tell them it was no longer necessary to investigate in a burglary into his house where also jewelry was taken from. And yeah, people started wondering why Andrew would have, well, decided to do so. And many people also do believe that it was because Andrew eventually found out that his daughter, Lizzie Borden, actually knew more about the incident than he originally may have thought she may know. Lizzie Borden was actually quite well known for being a shoplifter, and this makes no sense at all because Lizzie Borden actually came from a quite wealthy family, and yeah, her father also gave money to her because she was able to go to Europe, she was able to, well, get education, she was able to dress nicely, so Andrew Borden definitely spent money on Lizzie and also on Emma. So why would Lizzie, well, be in need of go shoplifting? And we don't know exactly, but we can assume that Lizzie did this for a thrill. There were consequences going on after this burglary, so after June 21st in 1891. Because the family Borden would from then on always lock the doors inside and outside the house. And this is also what most people confuse us about when we talk about the events that would later go on, because the family Borden really insisted on having the doors locked, the doors to the house especially, so having the doors locked, that no one would be able to get inside the house. And many people do speculate that especially Andrew Borden may have insisted on having all doors locked because he knew that there is a threat from outside going on. But in fact, it was only because there was a burglary on June 21st, 1891 that caused him to pay more attention to actually lock the doors. And this is why the family Borden was so insistent on locking all the doors. They did not expect a threat from outside going on. They just wanted to make sure no one would break into the house again. On July 21st, also in the same year, also in 1891, there would be a family disagreement, and we don't know for sure what this family disagreement was all about, but what we know is that Lizzie and Emma would leave for maybe a week, so for a couple of days. We also know that Andrew Borden actually purchased the house for the half-sister of his wife. They really pissed off Lizzie and Emma because in their opinion, Andrew did not spend enough money on them and he did not buy a house on the hill. And now they find Andrew buying a house for Abby's half-sister, and they're so angry with Andrew for this because this was not even his family and he did something for strangers that did not belong to the family at all in their opinion, but he would refuse to do the same thing for his own daughters. And I also have to mention that this incident was actually 5 years prior to the events that would follow. So the murder of Andrew and Abby Borden. This was 5 years prior. On August the same year, better say on August 2nd, 1892, the family Borden, so only a couple of days, little bit more than a week after Lizzie and Emma left home and probably returned after a week, the family Borden starts to feel sick, starts to feel ill, and especially Andrew and Abby Borden, but also their maid Bridget Sullivan, who started to work for the family Borden 3 years ago. felt sick. And Bridget actually was just referred to as Maggie, so I will switch between Maggie and Bridget. So just that you know, it's one and the same person. They only had this one maid, and she had her room in the attic, and she was originally from Ireland, so she was an Irish immigrant. And she was 26 at the time, so just in case you want to know. Yeah, she was the maid of the family Borden. And she also started to feel sick. So this is actually interesting because everyone else in the Borden household was not feeling well, except Lizzie. And she allegedly also did not feel well, but she was not as sick as the others. So, well, that's interesting. And we don't know about Emma, but as far as I'm aware, Emma was still with them at that time, and Emma did also not feel sick. So this is a really strange coincidence. So Abby Borden was actually concerned that someone may want to harm her, and she visited the family doctor, Dr. Bowen, in order to make sure that she was not poisoned with anything that would cause these symptoms. She said that it was probably just because she ate something wrong, and back in the days there were no refrigerators around, so it was more common for people to get food poisoning, and this is also what Dr. Bowen insisted on. Only one day after Abby went to Dr. Bowen and stated that she thought that it might be possible someone poisoned her. So on August 3rd, 1892, Lizzie went to the local pharmacy, to Smith's drugstore, and tried to buy poison there. She tried to buy prussic acid there, but the pharmacologist actually told her that it was not possible for her to buy it because she would have needed a recipe from a doctor, and she did not have these. And Lizzie actually got quite upset with that because she insisted on having the right to buy this prussic acid in Smith's drugstore because allegedly she would have bought it before. The same day, so also on August 3rd, 1892, a relative of the family Borden, so John Morse, actually arrived at the family home, and this was very unusual because John Morse was usually not around. They did not have a really close bond, and it was kind of a surprise that John Morse arrived, and he was the uncle of Lizzie and Emma Borden. So he had a connection to the family, but it was unusual for him to arrive, and he was, I don't know if he actually stayed there before, but at this day he would decide to pay the family Borden a visit, and it was also speculated that this might have been because he wanted to discuss Andrew's will together with Andrew Borden. So it was about that he might have just been there for a discussion about Andrew Borden's will. But this could have never been confirmed, so we don't know again. This is just a speculation that is out there. We don't know what they were talking about. Someone might try to harm them. And Lizzie is, well, she seems to be concerned, and she tells her friend Alice that she does not longer feel safe around this house, and that she's really concerned. And when we are looking at the next day, there are quite some speculations why Lizzie Borden actually visited her friend Alice and tell her all of these things. But still, so far we know that Lizzie was there and told her these things, and eventually Lizzie would return home, went to sleep, as all of the people in the Borden household, as well as John Morse, who decided to stay there overnight. And he stayed at the guest bedroom. And yeah, so they all went to sleep. It was quiet in the Borden house, and they would get up the next morning on August 4th, 1892. So again, we have the situation. They get up in the morning, as they did every usual day. John Morse is still around. Andrew and John Morse, well, would eventually go to the sitting room, and the sitting room is we would refer to it as a living room in today's day and age. But back then, a sitting room was basically the room where you would sit down with your guests, and it was very high-end to have a sitting room because normal people, so the poorer people, did not have a sitting room. And this also shows us that Andrew Borden may have been very strict with money, but that he still provided a decent home for his wife and also for his two daughters, because they also had this sitting room. And Bridget Sullivan would also have breakfast later on. She would make sure to clean the house. Abby was cleaning the house as well. She was trying to well, remove the dust from the cupboards, etc. So she was actually also cleaning up a little bit, and it was up to Bridget to clean the windows this day. Eventually, John Morse and Andrew Borden would both leave the house. John Morse would, well, get back home, and Andrew Borden would go to work, although he did not feel good this day. He still felt sick. And Bridget also felt sick, because although Abby Borden saw that Bridget Sullivan was obviously sick and did not feel well, she insisted on Bridget cleaning the windows inside and outside. So this was a huge task, because there were quite a few windows in the Borden house. And finally, it was also up to Lizzie to get up, and she went also down to the kitchen, where Bridget still was preparing the water and cleaning stuff to clean the windows soon thereafter. And Emma was out of town, and she also had an alibi, so Emma was not around at all. And Bridget asked Lizzie whether or not she wanted to have breakfast, and Lizzie told her no, she did not feel that good, and she would prefer to not have breakfast, or if she wanted to have breakfast, she would just have a light breakfast. So we don't know exactly if Lizzie Borden had breakfast. She allegedly just had a light snack in the morning, but this is also not important actually. So Bridget Sullivan got outside and started to clean the windows, and Lizzie was still in the kitchen. And allegedly, she then decided to go to the barn and to get some irons there, because she was sitting in the kitchen and started to think about a fishing trip she was planning to do with some friends. And as I've already mentioned, I mean, it is August in Fall River, Massachusetts, and it is quite a hot day. Again, Bridget felt sick and she had to clean the windows anyways, and she was not happy because she did not feel sick and because it was such a hot day. And now we have the situation that Lizzie wants to go in the barn and eat her snack there in the barn, which is really odd. And it's not only because a barn, I don't know if you've ever been in a barn, but I have been, and it is very, very hot in there in summer. And yeah, this is not the place you want to be around for any longer than you actually really have to be in there. Still, Lizzie allegedly decided to sit down, watch the house from the barn, and have her snack there. Although it was not only hot, and it was not only that it was hot in there, that there is thick air, that it probably smelled not that nice, but it was also covered completely in dust and it was dirty. Still, Lizzie Borden, with her nice dress, decides to go in the barn and have her snack there, instead of, well, eating it under the tree or eating it on the kitchen table. Yeah. Then she eventually would also search for some irons and would, about half an hour later, return to the family home. Andrew Borden got home because he did absolutely feel sick. He did absolutely not feel well at all. And he decided to get home earlier this day, which was very unusual for him, because this also shows us that he really needed to be sick. Still, Bridget Sullivan left him in. She unlocked the door, opened it for him and left him in, and this is when Bridget states that she heard Lizzie giggling from upstairs. Andrew would go on the sofa in his sitting room and, well, lay down in order to have a quick nap and to recover sooner from his disease. And Lizzie would get down, and Lizzie told Andrew that Abby, after she'd been asked where Abby was by Andrew, and she stated that Abby Borden was out to visit a sick friend, although she herself was sick. But yeah, allegedly she found a note in the kitchen from Abby who stated that she would go and visit her sick friend. So he had a nap. Lizzie went to, we don't know exactly because her statements changed multiple times, but allegedly she would go back into the kitchen because she was having some hot iron there. And Bridget would eventually feel even sicker, and she decided to get back to her attic room and just to have a rest there, just to have a quick nap, because she was really feeling not good. And she really hurried up to finish cleaning the windows, and at around 11 a.m. she actually managed to finish cleaning the windows. So she went upstairs to her attic bedroom. Bridget actually heard the town hall clock bell, and she thus knew that it was 11 a.m. when she laid down. At about 11:10 a.m. she would hear Lizzie screaming from downstairs, from the sitting room. Bridget, quick, come, someone killed father. And of course, Bridget was shocked and she ran downstairs. This was such a gruesome crime scene because Andrew Borden was not just killed, he was he was killed in a very, very violent manner because his face was basically completely destroyed. Someone must have taken something like a hatchet or an axe and, well, beaten him with this hatchet or axe about 19 times in the face. So there is nothing left of his face. And now Bridget has a situation that she stands there seeing the dead body of her employer and does not know really what to do. And Lizzie is also standing there and telling her to, well, go to the doctor, go to the family doctor, and, well, bring Dr. Bowen around because there's a body in the house. And she allegedly was too upset to go there herself, and she also told Bridget to hurry up, to be as quick as possible, to run the entire way to Dr. Bowen, because she did not want to be alone in the house. But if you send Bridget away and stay in the house, you are alone in the house, and you allegedly believe that someone just broke in, although the doors are all locked to the family home and there is no signs of forced entry. Still, Lizzie believed somehow that an intruder came into the house, killed her father, and, well, this was very recently, but this would also mean that the intruder would probably still be around. And why would she, if she actually believed this, wanted Bridget to go and stay in the house on her own? So Bridget would go and, well, try to find Dr. Bowen, which she eventually would do. And this time, Lizzie would get out of the door of the family house, and this is when her neighbor actually saw her. And the neighbor was very concerned because Lizzie obviously seemed to be very upset, seemingly. Well, the neighbor found that Lizzie acted strange, and Lizzie then immediately told her neighbor that someone had broken in and killed father, and that she was so scared, and that Bridget was up to find Dr. Bowen. And yeah, she also begged the neighbor to call the police, which the neighbor eventually would do. So police arrived at the Borden home, and police describes Lizzie to be very calm. I think she acted a little bit out of the ordinary, but not as much as police would have expected a female to act in such a situation. And yeah, still she told them the same thing as she had told before, that Abby had gotten a note from a sick friend and that she went out to attend, or, well, pay this friend who was allegedly sick a visit. And then she insisted on Bridget and the neighbor going upstairs to look for Abby Borden anyways, which was strange because she herself refused to go upstairs. And eventually Bridget would do this. She would go upstairs, and this is when she found the body of Abby Borden laying on the guest room floor, also hacked to death. And she was laying face down, so she was hacked to death from behind. Someone must have come in and attacked her while she was not paying any attention to the person. And if this would have been an intruder, either the intruder was very, very, very quiet, almost well, weightless probably, because you hear people going up and down the stairs and you hear people coming closer to you. So Abby must have either really not heard the intruder coming closer to her, or she did not pay attention to the intruder and thus stood with the back to the intruder, or the person who would eventually end up killing her, because she knew the person and, well, was not scared of the person at all. For instance, Lizzie. Yeah, so this is also unusual, and this is often not mentioned, because why would Abby Borden stand with the back to her murderer? This is a behavior you only show if you know the person and you don't expect this person to be dangerous. And what I'm also wondering, we know about Abby Borden that she was not necessarily the thinnest person. She weighed about 210 pounds. It definitely is suspicious that Bridget allegedly hears or overhears anything, but she does not hear Abby's body, well, falling down. And also, as Andrew Borden was killed, this was a very, very violent attack. He was hatched to death and he was hit by an hedge or by an axe for 19 times. And even if you argue that Bridget could not have heard Abby's body falling down, although it weighed about 210 pounds because she was outside the house cleaning the windows, then you would have to wonder why she wouldn't have heard how Andrew Borden was killed, although she was then upstairs in her room in the attic, where she allegedly hears anything. And Lizzie also wanted her friend Alice, whom she visited the evening prior and whom she told that she was scared for herself and also for the well-being of her family. She wanted this friend to be around as well. And yeah, Bridget also, well, managed to bring this friend around, and as police arrived, this friend, so Alice, was also there. And of course, especially after finding Abby's body as well within the house of the Borden family, police asked Lizzie if there was anyone who may have wanted to harm her parents. And this is also when I think this was when she insisted that these were not her parents, this was her father and his stepmother. I think this was done, sorry. So she already knew that Abby was dead, and then she insisted that this was her stepmother and not her mother, because this is the most important thing in this situation, at least for Lizzie Borden. Yeah, she said no, she cannot imagine this to, well, she couldn't imagine this to ever take place, and she also doesn't know who might have had a motive. And this is when Alice interrupts her and tells the police that Lizzie was scared previously, and she told her before that she was scared that someone may break in and hurt the family, and she was in fear previously. And this is interesting for police because now we have an independent witness stating that Lizzie was actually afraid. This would also make sense that she would have only told her friend the day prior, because she wouldn't have known previously. Because if she would have planned to hack her parents to death, she would have went to the friend way earlier on, because this would have looked even less suspicious to anyone if she would have planned this long before. So I think this was kind of, if she did it, it was kind of spontaneous, because she knew now that she wouldn't be able to buy Prozac acid anymore, and now she had to find an alternative. And this also would show us, if it was this way, that Lizzie Borden was actually very determined on getting her parents out of the way. And yeah, still, police actually left the bodies of Andrew and Abby Borden within the home. Back then in the 1800s, it was common to perform the autopsy, well, at the crime scene kind of. So we also have, well, a mystery going on here in Germany. It's called Hinterkaifeck. I don't know if you want me to do a video about this. Let me know in the comment section down below. Definitely if you're interested in the gruesome murders of Hinterkaifeck. Yeah, then I can do a video about this. I'd love to. But still, there the bodies were also having the autopsy right at the crime scene. And the bodies of Andrew and Abby Borden would stay within the family house for a couple more days, seemingly. The night the murders took place. Lizzie Borden would insist on getting down to the basement because allegedly she had her period and she was cleaning her undergarments in the basement, and this is also what she told police as soon as they arrived, that they shouldn't be suspicious about her because there was a bowl filled with water and bloody garment in the basement because she was just having her period, and this is how she cleaned up afterwards. And yeah, police was probably not even investigating there. Still, in the evening, she insisted that she needed to go down to the basement towards her friend Alice, and Alice stated that she would accompany her. And thus they went to the basement. Lizzie cleaned up a little bit, and they would return a couple of minutes later. Then Alice would, well, go to the toilet, and police watched the house from outside, and they would watch someone getting back into the basement, because the lights were switched on again, or there was light in the basement, maybe also from a candle, I don't know. And police watched what was going on, but they did not see it. They just saw that someone was near the sink in the basement. And yeah, this lasted for about 2 to 3 minutes. Then the lights went out again, and the person left the basement. And yeah, somehow police knew that this was Lizzie, so probably they saw a silhouette that would fit Lizzie's description, and it made sense that it was Lizzie. And we don't know up to this day what Lizzie actually did in the basement during these 2 to 3 minutes. Still, she went upstairs again, and yeah, a couple of days later, the next strange incident occurred. This was when her friend Alice saw Lizzie burning a blue dress. And as you can remember, Lizzie was wearing a blue dress the day the murders occurred. And this made her friend Alice very suspicious. Still, she decided to not tell the police immediately, but she would feel bad afterwards. And eventually she decided to tell police anyways. The question is, how would Lizzie Borden even manage to change her dresses on her own? Because back then the dresses were really not that easy to put on. I could imagine that someone helped Lizzie to get into the dress. And I could imagine this person being Bridget Sullivan, actually, because a lot of people say that Bridget helped Lizzie quite a bit with her testimonies. And I think so too. I don't know if Bridget Sullivan was actually involved, but maybe it was also only because she wanted to protect Lizzie because she liked her. Maybe it was also only because Bridget or Maggie wanted to not lose her job, because now her employers were dead, but still the daughters, Lizzie and Emma, were around, so maybe she wanted to stay there. And thus decided to protect Lizzie a little bit. We don't know exactly, maybe Lizzie even paid Bridget. Police would also find the entire situation suspicious, and this was also the reason why police arrested Lizzie Borden a week after the murders occurred. So better say on August 11th, 1892. And yeah, Lizzie Borden was arrested, and she actually had to be put into jail in another town because there is no women's prison in Fall Rivers. So she had to be put into a women's only jail in Taunton, which was a town nearby, so also in Massachusetts. And June 5th, 1893, so 1 year later about. And the trial would only last for about 2 weeks, because on June 20th, 1893, Lizzie would be found not guilty by the jury, and the jury would only need 90 minutes to find out that Lizzie Borden was actually innocent, not guilty. And during the trial, more and more people started to doubt Lizzie's story, and although she had quite some fans at the very beginning and people who wanted to support her, well, supporters basically, she lost the sympathy of the public quite quickly, especially since her testimonies changed quite often. Still, this was not allowed in trial as evidence against Lizzie Borden, who, by the way, had the best team of lawyers you could buy with money back in the 1800s. And most people started to tend to believe that Lizzie Borden actually did this, that she was responsible for the death of her father and of Mrs. Borden, so Abby. And I actually couldn't find out what happened to Bridget Sullivan after this. I don't know if she actually stayed. This was my dog. I'm sorry, I'm feeling like I'm saying this in every video, but she's always lying on my bed, which you can see here in the background, and she's always laying there and sleeping, and then sometimes she barks in her sleep or makes noises, and it's so cute, but she's like the cutest little thing. Yeah, so I hope you don't mind. Still, I don't know what happened to Bridget Sullivan after this tragic murder took place. I don't know if she stayed with Lizzie Borden. I don't know if she went back to Ireland. I don't know if she stayed in America with another family. But what we know is that, as I previously mentioned, a couple of weeks after the trial ended, so after she was found not guilty, she actually ended up buying a house on the hill, as she always wanted to, together with her sister Emma. And now they were living among the high society of Fall River, and they would now have been able to have access to all these fancy parties, but people tended more and more to believe that Lizzie Borden was actually guilty, and buying a house on the hill that quickly with the money she had just inherited by her father, who was brutally murdered by allegedly herself, by allegedly Lizzie, did not look good. And this was also one more thing which made people believe that Lizzie Borden actually did it. And in my opinion, this was pretty stupid of her to buy the house that quickly. She should have waited for at least a couple of months. And yeah, officially she was still grieving. She was in grief. She was also wearing black clothes all the time, at least during her trial, for 2 weeks after a year her parents were murdered. Still, we don't know exactly, but people tended to believe that Lizzie Borden did this. And this was also the time when the Jump Rope song came along. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. As she saw what she has done, she gave her father 41. To this day, we don't know exactly what was the murder weapon, but people or police assumed that it was actually an axe found in the basement of the family near the sink, or better say below the sink, where someone, allegedly Lizzie, walked down on her own in the middle of the night as police watched from outside and did something at the sink. And this axe did no longer have a handle, so it's only the blade of the axe, kind of, so if you know what I mean. The handling was missing, and it is assumed that the handling was missing because this was a wooden handling, as it is usual for axes. And if there would have been blood on it, and there would have been blood if it was the murder weapon, the blood wouldn't have been able to be removed. This might make sense that someone would have just burnt the handling and cleaned the axe, maybe in the sink. Lizzie Borden was still alive when this Jump Rope song actually originated, and she must have heard people, or better say children, singing this song over and over again as she walked down the streets. And this must have been terrible for her. Lizzie Borden, who was previously very involved in the church, actually started to stop attending church. And she also did no longer participate in the church activities, but instead she actually chose to participate in animal protection organizations, and she would also get in contact with actors. And on the house on the hill in which Emma and Lizzie lived from now on, and which they eventually ended up calling Maplecroft, they would have wild parties with actors, and Lizzie's new friends were actors and people like actors, and they were not really they were not well respected in society. And a couple of years later, so Lizzie Borden was already befriended with all of these actors, it would come to a conflict between Lizzie and Emma. And Emma would eventually leave Maplecroft, and she would never return. And this was something that upset Lizzie even more. And Emma Borden would actually state in an interview that she refused to leave Maplecroft until the circumstances became unbearable, but she did never explain what kind of circumstances became unbearable there. We can assume that, Emma was described as being very conservative and were very, very close-minded, that maybe she did not enjoy having the company of these unrespected people in her respectable neighborhood, in her respectable home, Maplecroft. We don't know exactly what Emma would continue doing. She would definitely leave Fall River, but Lizzie refused to leave Fall River, and she would stay at her beautiful home, her beautiful house in the mansion, and she would die at the age of 67 years. And although Lizzie and Emma were 10 years apart, Emma would die only 9 or 10 days after Lizzie Borden died, and the sisters would eventually find together in death again, because they were buried together with Andrew and Abby Borden in the family grave at the Oak Cemetery in Fall River, Massachusetts. And this is really sad, because in death they would be reunited again. Yeah. If you ask me what I think about the entire case, about the entire Lizzie Borden case, but I personally actually think that Lizzie Borden had a motive, she had the opportunity, and in my opinion she also had the personality to do so. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Lizzie Borden, but I don't know. Let me definitely know what you think in the comment section down below. But I also think that if it was Lizzie Borden, she, or better say Bridget Sullivan, must have known more. I don't know if Bridget Sullivan was involved, I actually doubt it, but I think Bridget Sullivan actually protected Lizzie, especially with her testimony. And I think that if Bridget allegedly heard anything all the time, she must have heard Abby's body falling down, because again, she weighed 210 pounds. And you hear a body of 210 pounds falling down the floor, falling on the floor. And this was something Bridget allegedly did not hear. Then she allegedly also did not see, Abby going upstairs, or she allegedly did not know where Abby was. And also Bridget states that she heard Lizzie giggling from upstairs. So she hears the giggling, but she does not hear how Abby and Andrew Borden are hacked to death, but she hears the giggling. This does also not make that much sense to me. I think Bridget knows more. In my opinion, Bridget may have helped Lizzie to switch dresses this quickly, but still, I think it makes quite some bit of a noise if you hack someone to death. And if Bridget heard anything, she heard allegedly doors open and close, she heard people moving through the house, she heard Lizzie scream, she heard Lizzie giggling from upstairs, etc. She would have also heard Lizzie hacking her father to death. And in my opinion, she would have also heard Abby Borden falling down to the floor. Because we also don't know if the windows were open. I could imagine the windows to be open, well, at least the window she was not currently cleaning, because again, it was a hot day in August and it was still in the morning hours. In summer, you usually open the windows in the morning hours and in the evening hours and then close them during the day. So I could imagine that some of the windows were actually still open and Bridget was near the windows. So I could imagine that she could have heard Abby falling down the floor, especially since she was so heavy. Yeah, and it makes noise to hack someone to death, and even if Andrew was dead by the first blow. Then the question is, I doubt that Abby was dying with the first blow as well. I think she definitely had the opportunity to scream, and I also think this is what happened, that at least Abby screamed. And this is something Bridget must have heard even if the windows were closed. If someone is hacked to death and screams, this is something Bridget must hear. And I've also read reports that it is possible that Lizzie did actually not change her clothes, but this would not explain why she would burn a blue fabric dress a couple of days later that allegedly had some color on it that reminds people, or may remind people of blood. And yeah, still there are experts out there who say that it would be possible for Lizzie, even if she did it, to not be covered in blood after the murders, because the blood would allegedly, I don't know, I'm not an expert on this is just what I found on the internet, that the blood would go in the other direction, and that if Lizzie would have been hacking Andrew and Abby Borden to death, then she would not necessarily have to have a lot of blood over her. I really think the Lizzie Borden case is one of the most interesting cases I've covered so far. I actually can't wait to find out what you guys think. So please make sure to leave me a comment down below. And if you haven't done so already, please make also sure to like, share, and especially subscribe to my channel for more future content like this. I hope to see you next time. Bye!